A terrifying faceless monster suddenly crawled out from the shore. The woman, however, showed no sign of fear. She looked at the time just right. Then she raised her crossbow, aiming at a target she couldn't even see. As the monster got closer, she pulled the trigger and hit the creature right between the eyes. The monster collapsed inside the circle she had drawn beforehand. Her name was Miss Peregrine. She was a peculiar being, a time-resetting bird. Miss Peregrine founded an orphanage to protect the children from evil forces. Every orphan here had a special ability. Look closely at the girl named Claire. Normal people ate with their mouths, but she held a chicken drumstick behind her head. In just 3 seconds, she finished the entire drumstick, leaving no trace. Miss Peregrine gently wiped the crumbs from Claire's lips. If there wasn't enough food on the table, it wasn't a problem. Fiona had the ability to enlarge any object infinitely. She focused on a carrot, and in the blink of an eye, a giant carrot broke through the soil. Then the youngest Bronwyn used her strength, and the enormous carrot was pulled from the ground with ease. Quickly delivered to the kitchen. Need hot water? No need for fire. Olive placed her hands on the kettle, and within seconds, a pot of boiling water sat on the table. There was also Hugh, who could spit out bees, and Emma, whose body was lighter than air. But the most mysterious were the twins Joel and Peter. Their ability was just like Medusa in Greek mythology. They could turn living creatures into stone just by looking at them. Though every child here had a peculiarity, they could only hide inside the time loop that Miss Peregrine created. This meant that all the children were trapped in September 3rd, 1943, forever frozen in time, never aging, until one day a boy from 2016, Jake, appeared. That day Jake received an urgent phone call from his grandfather Abe. Abe warned him that their house had been attacked by a monster. By the time Jake arrived, Abe was lying on the ground, barely alive. Jake was horrified to see that his grandfather's eyes were gone. With his final breath, Abe told Jake to go to the island he had always talked about, to return to September 3rd, 1943, and to find Miss Peregrine at the orphanage. She would give Jake all the answers he needed. With that, Abe passed away. To uncover the truth, Jake took his grandfather's old photos and traveled to the mysterious island. In a hidden forest, he found a rundown orphanage. The eerie place was in complete ruins, covered in dust, untouched for years. Jake wandered around, wondering why his grandfather had sent him here. Just as he was about to leave, a shadowy figure appeared in front of him. Startled, Jake turned and ran. As he reached the staircase, 2 girls were peeking at him from behind a door. In the corner, 2 masked children stood still. Jack panicked and ran as fast as he could, but tripped over a rock and fell. When Jake woke up, a group of peculiar children was staring at him. Surprisingly, he wasn't afraid, he was amazed. They were the very same friends his grandfather had always talked about. The children led him through a cave, until they reached a beautiful house. Jake was stunned. It was the same orphanage he had seen before, but now it was perfectly intact. The door opened. Standing there was Miss Peregrine herself. What Jake didn't realize was, he had already traveled back to September 3rd, 1943. The cave was the entrance to Miss Peregrine's time loop. Miss Peregrine immediately recognized him. Jake looked exactly like his grandfather when he was young. Under her guidance, Jake finally met all of the peculiar children in the orphanage. He realized that everything his grandfather had told him was real. That night, Miss Peregrine gathered everyone outside. A clock was placed on the table. Everyone wore gas masks, standing silently. Miss Peregrine checked the time just right. Suddenly, warplanes roared across the sky. As the last plane flew over, its hatch opened. A bomb dropped straight down, but Miss Peregrine remained calm. She pressed pause. Time froze. The bomb and raindrops hung in midair, motionless. Then she began rewinding her watch. Everything that had happened started moving backward. Time reversed, until they returned 24 hours earlier. Miss Peregrine had used her peculiarity to keep the orphanage safe in a never-ending time loop, locked forever on September 3rd, 1943. The next day, Jake asked Miss Peregrine about his grandfather's death. He mentioned seeing a terrifying faceless monster at the scene. Miss Peregrine's expression suddenly changed. She refused to answer and walked away. Her reaction made Jake suspicious. He felt that she was hiding something. Determined, Jake sought out Emma, the girl who could control air. Emma took him out to the open sea. Then, without hesitation, she dove straight into the water. Jake hesitated but followed. As they sank deeper and deeper, Jake started struggling for breath. Suddenly, Emma released a huge air bubble from her mouth, encasing Jake's head. He could finally breathe. Soon they reached a sunken ship. Inside, skeletons lay scattered across the floor, but Emma moved through the wreck as if she knew it well. She led Jake into a secret room inside the ship. Emma took a deep breath and gently blew out a stream of air. Instantly, the entire sunken ship filled with countless bubbles. As more and more bubbles appeared, the massive weight of the seawater was forced out. Emma quickly shut the hatch, sealing the water outside. Then she took out a small box. It was something Abe, Jack's grandfather, had given her for safekeeping over 70 years ago. Inside, there was a map marking the location of time portals, and several photos of men with all white eyes. The last photo showed a man named Baron. He was the leader of the Whites. They were once Hollowgasts. They ate the eyes of peculiar children to transform into whites. Abe had been one of the peculiars, but in the end he was still brutally killed by a Hollowgast. Emma told Jack that he was also one of the peculiars. Only peculiars could enter the time loop and be here. Seeing Jack's disbelief, Emma led him to the orphanage's wall and helped him climb up. From a distance, Miss Peregrine was walking toward the shore with her crossbow. Moments later, a Hollowgast crawled out from the water. Jack froze. The monster looked exactly like the one he had seen when his grandfather was killed. Miss Peregrine calmly pulled the trigger. The arrow struck the Hollowgast right in the forehead. The creature collapsed inside the white circle that had been drawn beforehand. Emma turned to Jack and explained, "Hollowgasts are invisible, no one else could see them," but Jack had inherited his grandfather's peculiarity. Now he was the only person who could see Hollowgasts. Miss Peregrine had been able to kill the Hollowgast because Abe, when he killed his first Hollowgast, had memorized the exact time and place it would appear. By remembering this information, Miss Peregrine was able to hit an enemy she couldn't even see. After realizing Jack had discovered his purpose, Miss Peregrine finally told him everything. Years ago, a group of former peculiars led by Baron attempted an experiment to achieve immortality. They captured a time-resetting bird and locked it in a cage. Then they forced peculiars to wear masks connected to the bird. But something went horribly wrong. Smoke started rising from their bodies. Their muscles twitched violently, and then their bodies mutated. Their faces became monstrous. Their mouths grew sharp fangs, and in an instant, all of them transformed into faceless, invisible Hollowgasts. Later, these Hollowgasts discovered that the only way to return to human form was by eating the eyes of other peculiars. Using their invisibility, they hunted and slaughtered countless peculiars. To protect the peculiar children, Miss Peregrine created the time loop on this hidden island. Just then, Olive rushed in with an urgent message. Someone had arrived. It was Miss Avocet, who could also transform into a bird. Her time loop had been discovered by Hollowgasts, and all the peculiars under her care had been wiped out. Miss Peregrine realized the island was no longer safe. She immediately decided to lead everyone away. Emma begged Jack to come with them, but Jack couldn't just abandon his parents. He stepped through the time portal and returned to the present day. But soon after, a gruesome murder took place on the island. An elderly man had been killed, his eyes were missing. Jack's heart pounded with fear. He knew that a Hollowgast had followed him to the island. Without hesitation, he rushed back through the time portal to warn Miss Peregrine. But before he could enter, a strange man began chasing him. To Jack's horror, it was Baron, the leader of the Whites. He had been searching for the entrance to the time loop. Baron had taken Jack hostage and brought him to the orphanage. By now, Baron no longer needed to eat eyes to stay human, but he had never given up on achieving true immortality by harnessing the power of time birds. Miss Peregrine knew that the Hollowgasts would soon attack the orphanage. Jack was the only one who could see them and lead the others in battle, so she offered herself in exchange for Jack. She transformed into her bird form and flew into Baron's cage. As the Hollowgasts closed in, Jack rallied the peculiar children, arming them for the fight of their lives. But before the battle even began, a Hollowgast suddenly appeared and grabbed Miss Avocet. Before anyone could react, the Hollowgast devoured her eyes, killing her instantly. Enoch was suddenly grabbed by the Hollowgast's long tongue and lifted into the air. Just as the Hollowgast was about to devour his eyes, Jack shot an arrow, hitting the Hollowgast. The creature roared in pain and released Enoch. Taking the chance, everyone rushed out of the room, but the enraged Hollowgast became furious and chased after them relentlessly. Fiona stood outside the window and made the tree branches grow rapidly. Before the Hollowgast could break in, everyone climbed onto the branches and escaped toward the ground. At that moment, several fighter jets appeared in the sky. Without Miss Peregrine's time loop, the orphanage was about to be reduced to ruins. Suddenly, the Hollowgast smashed through the window and lunged at them. At the same time, the last warplane dropped its bomb. In a split second, Emma grabbed Jack and jumped off the building. The Hollowgast and the orphanage were blown to pieces. Meanwhile, Miss Peregrine's time loop was destroyed. This meant that the peculiar children would start aging rapidly and eventually die. Their only hope was to rescue Miss Peregrine and rebuild the time loop, but Miss Peregrine had already been taken to the other side of the world by Baron. To save her, they had to cross the ocean as quickly as possible. Emma led everyone to the sunken ship. Using her power, she filled the ship's hull with air. As more and more air was pumped in, the ship slowly floated to the surface. Finally, all the seawater inside was drained out. Then Olive ignited the ship's engine, and just like that, they solved the problem of crossing the sea. Jack used the map his grandfather had left behind to locate the nearest time loop. Following the map, they soon arrived at their destination. Inside an abandoned amusement park, Jack and Emma spotted Baron and several Hollowgasts. Emma immediately provoked Baron to lure the Hollowgasts out. As expected, the creatures chased after her. The peculiar children, already in position, started throwing snowballs at the Hollowgasts, waiting for them to slowly become visible. Emma then blew colorful gel onto their bodies. At that moment, a horde of skeleton soldiers appeared. It was Enoch. He had revived the sunken ship's crew. A fierce battle broke out. The Hollowgasts were strong, but they couldn't withstand the overwhelming numbers of skeleton soldiers. One by one, they were eliminated. The last Hollowgast tried to escape, but Bronwyn impaled it with a carousel horse, sending it crashing into the sea. With the Hollowgasts defeated, only Baron and his two henchmen remained. Hugh opened his mouth and unleashed unleashed a swarm of bees, launching the first attack, but Baron's men were powerful too. One of them transformed back into her true form and leaped onto the platform. Before she could react, Claire suddenly used the mouth on the back of her head to bite down on her. The twins immediately removed their masks, revealing their deadly gaze. In an instant, the enemy turned into a lifeless stone statue and shattered upon hitting the ground. Fiona threw a handful of beans at the other henchman. Within seconds, the beans grew into massive vines, wrapping him up tightly. On the other side, Emma created a powerful gust of wind, pinning Baron against the wall. Jack rushed into the lab and freed the caged time birds, but soon Emma's strength faded, and Baron broke free. He smashed open the lab doors, but by then, all the time birds had already escaped. Enraged Baron charged at Jack, ready to kill him. Just then Emma and Enoch burst into the room, but something was wrong. Now there were two identical Jacks standing in front of them. No one could tell who was real and who was fake. Suddenly a Hollowgast appeared in the room. It was the one that had fallen into the sea. It hadn't died after all. But to everyone's shock, the Hollowgast walked straight toward the fake Jack. It couldn't recognize that Baron had transformed into Jack, and since Baron couldn't see Hollowgasts, before he could react, the Hollowgast grabbed him and ripped out his eyes. Then it devoured them with delight. Jack quickly shot an arrow, striking the Hollowgast in the heart. The creature collapsed to the ground, finally dead. At last, the crisis was over, the final goodbye. Everyone was ready to board the ship and return to 1943. Jack and Emma stood together, saying their reluctant goodbyes. In the end, Jack stepped through the time loop and returned to his own world. But because Baron and the Hollowgasts had been eliminated, the modern world had changed. In this timeline, Jack's grandfather Abe had never been hunted by Hollowgasts. Jack told Abe everything that had happened. Abe smiled and encouraged him, "Follow your own path and never live with regrets." Jack finally understood. Without hesitation, he stepped through the time loop again and found Emma just before she set sail.